Hello everyone, welcome back to Let's Play Clue. In today's video, we're going to be focusing around the second case, which is blackmail. And I will be skipping this because I want to get this done. I will be skipping intros and stuff because I want to get this done. This is a brand new case, and I gotta make sure. Okay, I'm choosing plum, also known as purple. Because, no, I'm gonna save that for last. I'm gonna choose red because it's my mom's favorite color. Excuse me, I have to blow out the stuff in the laptop. Alright, so let's begin. Woo! Why am I saying that?
They say a blackmailer never prospers. Mr. Body would have laughed at that. He was not sentimental when it came to making money. He knew all about the 7 deadly sins, especially greed. And being rich himself, he knew how to dangle temptation in front of people and how to put the pressure on when temptation didn't work. And when something big came up, when Mr. Body really needed money, then he was ruthless. But Mr. Body made one mistake. He didn't see the greed in himself, and that made him vulnerable.
Okay, so the second case is about blackmail, and right now I'm playing it in novice mode because expert and all that is just, you know. Okay.
A light bulb. Fingerprints, Mr. Green.
Okay. Okay. Let's re-scroll here. Oh, wait a minute.
Rope on table.
Okay, no fingerprints on the rope for some reason. Here's a cutscene.
I don't know what's wrong with you men these days. You can't do anything for yourselves, can you?
Alright, so let's see. This is the hall where Mrs. Peacock and Mrs. White is at. And Mr. Green is the only person that was like, it's the only suspect. And the rope is like, you know, I don't know what I'm saying. Let's talk to both of these suspects as we follow right now, because we need to get some closure.
I don't know who killed Body, but I suspect that there was more than one attempt. I nearly came a cropper myself with what was probably a trap laid for Body. Somebody had tied a length of rope across the stairs, and they'd removed the light bulb. I've no idea who it was. I do think you should have a word with Mrs. Peacock, though. Not that I think she tied the rope, but I was just on my way past the study when I heard a ping. You know, the sound a telephone makes when it is being replaced. Well, the room was in darkness, so I waited to see who came out. It was Mrs. Peacock. She'd been eavesdropping.
Okay. Alright, let's go back to the mansion and talk to Mrs. Peacock, who happens to be in this hall right now.
I always felt that I knew Mr. Body rather well, but apparently I was wrong. I listened in to a telephone conversation between Body and one of his associates on the extension in the study, and I found out exactly what he was up to. I also knew that Body was getting Colonel Mustard involved in some way, and I wanted to do what I could to help. The Colonel hinted at something in the lounge earlier. I thought Miss Scarlett, Body's niece, might be able to help. But when I mentioned the Colonel, she practically became hysterical. She even threw a very heavy and valuable object at me. Unfortunately, I had the dubious pleasure of her company in the conservatory later. We were together when we heard about Body.
Interesting. Interesting. So this is the one. That music is so loud. But this is the one where Miss Scarlet gets a bit upset of Mrs. Peacock because she probably knows some information about a certain individual. Here's a cutscene.
I have my contacts, and they have warned me that Boulder's Brewery is on the slide. If you don't tell the others, then I shall be forced to.
Faith, Colonel.
Faith.
Fingerprints Mrs. Peacock and Mr. Body.
Both of them use the phone. Oh, something in the chair. Or the desk.
A locked drawer. It contains money. Fingerprints Mrs. White and Mr. Body.
Interesting. Let's see. Is there anybody in this room? No. We're going to continue to go back and forth until we see something flashing that allows us to interact. Let's use the secret passage. And you better be careful of who you guess is the murderer. If you choose wrong, you have to try it again, because you only have 3 bells left in novice mode. And I think other difficulties, you get less than that. Here's Mr. Green.
Candlestick, recently polished.
The candlestick is recently polished.
A small key found in drawer. Fingerprints Mrs. White.
It looks like Mrs. White has the key to something, but we don't know exactly why she has it. And I do believe that she's polishing the candlestick, as usual. Let's try this one. Oh!
A safe in the sideboard. Checks and drafts in the safe, including those from Professor Plum and Mrs. Peacock.
Okay. Alrighty then. So we have a cutscene. This is the one that she's talking about.
I'll be brief.
I have nothing to say to you.
I can assure you the feeling is mutual. However, other people are involved.
They certainly are.
Please, listen to me. Unless Body can be persuaded to pull out of this investment, I, amongst others, will lose everything. I expect no sympathy upon my own.
Could you please get to the point?
Colonel Mustard is involved with Body in this. I don't know how nor why, but I want him freed from Body's clutches. You must go to your uncle and persuade him to pull out.
Why should I want to help the Colonel, Mrs. Peacock?
There is certain information that's not available to you, Miss Scarlet.
About me and Michael. You know nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing.
Oh my goodness. Let's talk to Mr. Green. He may not know certain things. He doesn't know the candlestick nor the rope. But let's talk to him anyways.
I have to admit that I did advise people to invest in boulders. It seemed like the right thing to do at the time. But I'm really sorry now, because people like Mrs. White were bound to suffer. Yes, I knew that the brewery was about to go down, and that Body was going to make money out of it. He was taking a fat commission on any funds he could bring in, and he cared nothing for the consequences to his friends and employees. Most people wanted him dead, but the only person I saw with a weapon was the Colonel. He was marching towards the staircase with a large, vicious-looking knife in his hands. Goodness knows what for.
So Mr. Green only saw Colonel Mustard with the knife. It is quite obvious that something is up. Something is up between him and Mr. Body. But if you haven't seen the cutscene about Miss Scarlet and Mrs. Peacock, it appears that Mrs. Peacock needs Colonel Mustard to pull out. Well, not Colonel Mustard, Miss Scarlet's uncle. And apparently, Mrs. Peacock claims that there's some information that is unavailable to Miss Scarlet. And when she says about me and Michael, which I assume is Colonel Mustard, she was in shock. But then for some reason, Miss Scarlet is like, "You know nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing." And then tosses the candlestick and breaks the thing. Obviously, Colonel Mustard and Miss Scarlet had something going on here.
A telegram addressed to Colonel Mustard, hidden in a book. The telegram warns that Boulder's Brewery is in serious financial difficulties and an unacceptable risk. Fingerprints Miss Scarlet and Mr. Body.
I would be quite surprised. Oh.
Lead pipe hidden down back of sofa. Fingerprints Mrs. White. Traces of blood. Blood unidentifiable.
It appears that Mrs. White was holding the lead pipe, and there's blood on it. Interesting.
I can't tell you anymore. Body's going ahead, no matter what happens, no matter who gets hurt.
Goodness sake, Michael, this isn't you skulking about like a common criminal. Tell me what you know.
Pull out of the brewery deal now. I know it's going to fail, and so does Body.
But he already has my banker's draft. Are you mixed up with him in this? Is that how you know?
No, I'm not. But I've been warned, and I'm waiting for confirmation. Please, don't ask me anymore.
He's blackmailing you, isn't he? That's why you can't talk.
If Body goes ahead with the investment, you will lose your money. All of it. But I have far, far more to lose, believe me.
Apparently, Colonel Mustard... Ooh! It's another secret passage. Let's go there. Apparently, Colonel Mustard knows something that Mrs. Peacock will lose her money to Mr. Body. But he could not specifically say because Mr. Body is blackmailing him. And look what we have here. We have Professor Plum, and of course the lovely Miss Scarlet. Uh-oh.
Glass smashed. A book missing.
And there's something on the floor.
Mr. Body's pen on the floor, beside an open book. Oh, wait a minute. We got a lot of evidence in this library. Fingerprints, Mr. Body.
So Mr. Body is using that phone. Let's see who else.
Gun. Appears to have been fired 4 times. Fingerprints, Mrs. Peacock, Mrs. White, and Colonel Mustard.
So 3 suspects are holding this weapon. Mrs. Peacock, Mrs. White, and Colonel Mustard. But there's a book lying on the floor.
A hollowed-out book on the floor. Book empty. Bloodstains on book. Tests show blood to be Mrs. White's.
So she was holding the candlestick.
I was hoping this wouldn't come up. Yes, I did see the candlesticks. In fact, both of them were on the dining room table when I was there with Mrs. Peacock. We were having a row over Colonel Mustard, and it got out of hand. I said something, and I thought she was going to slap me across the face. I threw the candlestick across the room, and it shattered an ornamental plate. I walked out. I haven't seen it since.
Alright, I have to edit this out because I received a pop-up from this laptop here. So let's talk to Miss Scarlet.
I'm afraid I've made rather an enemy of Mrs. Peacock. She asked me to meet her in the dining room, then acted as if she knew more about the Colonel's private affairs than I did. I have no idea what she was hinting at. You'd have to ask her. But I'm afraid I revealed rather more than I intended about my relationship with the Colonel. I completely lost my temper. I would like to think that Mrs. Peacock killed Uncle Body, but I have to admit that she was with me in the conservatory at the time of the murder. So you see, we're both in the clear.
So they're both in the room by the time of the murder. So it seems that Miss Scarlet could be innocent, I believe. I don't know. I also noticed that I used the bell, and I don't know if it's because of the secret passage thing. Well, I better be careful not to waste it. Let's talk to Professor Plum. Let's talk to Professor Plum.
The tension that's been created over this boulders business has been enough to drive anybody insane. Even I have behaved badly. I managed to make Mrs. White very angry with me in the hall earlier.
Really?
But I expect you've heard about that. And although I am not in the habit of accusing other people of crimes, I think there is one thing you should investigate. I suggest you find out what Mr. Green was doing heading upstairs with a length of rope. He was trying to be as quiet as he could, but those stairs do creak. A word with the Colonel wouldn't go amiss either. He seems to spend half of his time in quiet corners with Miss Scarlet, and the other half with Mrs. Peacock. But never together. He seems to have got himself into a dreadful mess.
Interesting. It appears that he made Mrs. White mad for some reason. And I know I skipped the cutscene on that, but I just like to move forward.
Glass smashed. A book missing.
This is a cutscene. It appears that's Mr. Body. It appears that is Mr. Body. He was on the phone for some reason. And here's the billiard room. Uh-oh.
A tray with broken glass and liquid. Liquid identified as beer.
There's another cutscene.
Try some of this Boulder's plum.
He's drinking beer.
Knife. Fingerprints, Miss Scarlet, Colonel Mustard, and Mrs. Peacock.
Interesting. So, let's see. I better not use too many secret passages, though, because I don't know if that's going to affect the whole game. Because I thought that the bell is like... Okay, let's ask him about the knife.
The knife? Oh, I used it to cut the rope that some clown had tied across the top of the stairs. It nearly killed Mrs. White. The rope, I mean. I went down to get a knife, and I met Miss Scarlet coming along the corridor with one. Well, I assumed that she'd heard me and was bringing one up to us. I left the thing in the billiard room when I'd finished with it. No, I haven't seen any gun. You mean Body's gun? His revolver? No, I haven't seen it since last weekend. We got in a spot of target practice, and I haven't seen it since then, though. No reason to. I'm afraid that I knew that Boulder's Brewery was about to go under. I'd heard from an old school chum in the city. I told Body that I was going to tell the others. We were in the study, and it all got rather heated. But Body turned the tables on me. He knew that I'd got involved in a silly liaison with Miss Scarlet, and he threatened to tell Mrs. Peacock, a lady for whom I have the utmost regard. He was blackmailing me. I did threaten him, but I did nothing about it, of course. I plucked up the courage to tell Mrs. Peacock everything when I heard that Body had been murdered. I was pretty mad at him myself, but it certainly wasn't serious enough to commit murder over. I think the good professor could well be your man. Now, I understand he'd got himself into a fine old mess over this Boulder's business.
Interesting. Interesting. Okay, so... Oh my goodness. Let's get out of here. I love the 3D animation whenever we leave the room. I have played this before. Just a reminder. Okay, so now let's see. Oh, here's the conservatory. Here's the cutscene.
I'm sorry. None of this would have happened if I hadn't behaved like a complete fool.
How can you be so arrogant? Don't you think I have any say in my own affairs? That I might actually have decided to get involved with you?
It was all a mistake. We can't go on like this.
So you're going to forget all about us and creep back to Mrs. Peacock just because she's in some trouble over Uncle Body's investment?
Mrs. Peacock is an entirely innocent party.
Oh, she wouldn't know the meaning of the word. She's forced you into this.
It's not her, I tell you.
Well, then it's got to be Uncle Body. Tell me. I said I'd do anything for you, even if you are spineless. I won't let Uncle Body destroy you. You see, I know more about this than you think.
Uh-oh. We heard something. What's this here?
A drawer forced. Drawer empty. No fingerprints.
So, apparently, Miss Scarlet has decided to get involved in Colonel Mustard's situation. But he considered it as a mistake or something. What is this?
A stain. Tests show it to be water.
For some reason, it's gotta be some sort of drink. Let's see. There are other rooms that we haven't checked yet. But I better pay attention to my Bandicam recorder because at this point right now, I cannot waste any space, any time, or anything whatsoever. And I also need to check my notebook just to see if I got everything. Let me click here. We're missing the kitchen. That's one thing. We got all 6 of the suspects. Mustard met Scarlett in the conservatory. Mustard wanted to defend Mrs. Peacock. Scarlett says she knew enough to stop Body destroying Mustard. Scarlett met Mrs. Peacock in the dining room. Peacock asked Scarlett to persuade Body to pull out of brewery deal, which is quite possibly of what she's trying to do. Scarlett hinted to Mrs. Peacock she was seeing Mustard through the candlestick at the ornament plate. Mustard met Mrs. Peacock in the lounge, told her to pull out of the brewery deal. Peacock thought Body blackmailing him. Mustard had the knife. But what about the gun? It appears that fingerprints is Mrs. Peacock, Mrs. White, and Colonel Mustard. However, for some reason, Colonel Mustard said that he didn't know anything about the gun. So technically he lied. So I know exactly... So I think I know exactly who did it. I'm trying to get to the other side right now. I'm playing this on a Windows mode version, and by version I meant like I'm playing it with no full screen whatsoever, and it's making things difficult for me to get the arrows like this. There we go. Here's the wrench.
Fingerprints Professor Plum and Mrs. White.
Here's a cutscene. And we're skipping that one because of copyright music. But I do believe that Mr. Green was playing the piano, and Mrs. Peacock came in and was upset of what he had either snitched or something. And she was planning to shoot, She was planning to shoot Mr. Green, but that shot was meant for Mr. Botti. Until Mr. Green said something.
Candlestick. Damaged. Fingerprints Mrs. Peacock, Miss Scarlett, and Mrs. White.
It looks like the females are using the candlestick.
There is nothing of interest here.
Of course, Butler. There is nothing interesting in this thingamajig. Whatever you want to call it. Such a shame. Here's a cutscene.
I know you've got a lot invested with Body in this brewery business, right?
It's all that again, is it?
Look, there isn't the time to explain this to you. You've got to get that money back from Body. He signs for the shares on Monday. Then it'll be too late.
But you told us to go in for this. You said that Mr. Body practically guaranteed us a big return on the shares.
Yes, I know. But Mrs. White, that brewery's almost bankrupt. Body's not even investing in it himself. All he's doing is collecting a fat commission for the money he brings in. He can't lose.
Did you know the brewery was in trouble when you told us?
Yes, I did. I shouldn't be telling you this, but I'm sorry.
So that explains why Mrs. White looks upset when Mr. Green told us. It's because she found out that the brewery has been bankrupt. Yikes. So, alright, so right now that we looked up every evidence and all that kind of stuff, it's time to figure out some information that we didn't know. We're going to talk to Mrs. Peacock about the weapon that she used, which I believe it's the gun, but she didn't use it on Mr. Butty. She used it to target to Mr. Green, which I'm assuming she's angry at him for some reason. Right now, I'm trying to get into the notebook, but for some reason, it will not let me. There we go. Alright, we're gonna transport ourselves to the hall. We're going to talk to Mrs. Peacock about the weapon that she used.
You must excuse me. This is very hard for me. I can only assume that my mind was in chaos at the time. I went to Body's study and took the gun. I knew where he kept it. I have to tell you now that I would have killed him there and then if I'd seen him. Instead, I met Green in the ballroom, and we had the most frightful row. I must have been hysterical. I fired 2 shots at him. I think I left the gun on the piano.
Interesting. She was searching for Mr. Botty, and she probably wanted to kill him, I assumed. But instead she found Mr. Green in the ballroom. Now we need to talk to Colonel Mustard. And I'm trying to figure out if he has the gun, because according to the notes, there's fingerprints that he has the gun in his hand. But let's hear what he says.
No, I haven't seen any gun. You mean Body's gun? His revolver?
He says no. So I can only assume that he is lying. He is lying because he did have the weapon. And now let's talk to Mr. Green. He didn't use the weapon, but maybe he will tell us what happened between him and Mrs. Peacock.
Yes, I saw it all right. I ended up looking down the wrong end of it. I was with Mrs. Peacock in the ballroom, and things were getting a bit heated. She had every reason to feel that I'd betrayed her, but it hardly justified trying to blow my head off. 1 minute we were arguing, and the next she pulled a revolver from her handbag and fired it at me. I ran for it. There were 2 shots, but luckily I'm still here.
Interesting. So he saw the weapon, but it was in the hands of Mrs. Peacock. And it's quite obvious that she was mad at him for betraying him. Like, he probably said something to Mr. Buddy that is like, you know? So, I do believe I know who did it. I just have to make absolutely sure that this is absolutely correct. So we're going to go back to the hall. And I'm playing this on a novice difficulty. Because I have played this before. If you haven't seen the video, I know exactly who did it. ladies and gentlemen. And it is quite obvious. Why is it quite obvious? Well, it's simply because it is obvious.
You think the murder took place in the hall? But who was the murderer?
It is actually Colonel Mustard.
Which weapon do you think they used?
It's this one.
And this is your accusation? You think the murderer was Colonel Mustard in the hall with the gun?
Yes.
Congratulations, you got it all right. Let's go back and have a look at it step by step and see how it happened.
Mr. Body had persuaded several people to invest in Boulder's Brewery. He knew they'd lose everything, but he still took their money. But Colonel Mustard had more to lose than money. If he didn't silence Mr. Body, then all his rather sordid secrets would be revealed, and Mrs. Peacock would find out about his relationship with Miss Scarlet. She would be devastated, and he couldn't face that. The Colonel lied about his whereabouts. He didn't go to the conservatory, as he said. He went after Mr. Body to have it out with him. He found Mr. Body in the study, and he tried to reason with him, but Mr. Body only laughed. He told the Colonel that he was an old fool, and then he walked out, still laughing. Colonel Mustard saw the gun on the desk where Mrs. White had left it earlier. He grabbed it and went straight after Mr. Body. He caught up with him in the hall. The Colonel's first shot missed Mr. Body altogether, and the bullet lodged in the wall. But he made no mistake with his second shot. He knew that he'd have to get rid of the gun. He also knew that there was nobody in the library, so he hid the gun in the log basket there. He was in such a panic that he never thought to remove his fingerprints.
And that is how Mr. Body met his end. Why not come back and try to solve the next murder mystery at Arlington Hall?
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. There you have it. That is Blackmail from the game of Clue in 1996. Next up, in the last and third and final part, we're moving on to the road to Damascus. I don't know how to pronounce this word, but we're going to get to this case as well. So until next time, ladies and gentlemen, stay safe, stay healthy, be kind to others. Have a blissful, wonderful day.